you've met or heard Vern before, a year ago, October, when Journey was getting his probationer's license, we decided to go up and support him. And Pastor Vern was the keynote speaker for that. And I heard a lot of people really liked that. Just as a side note, many of you may know that Mervyn multiply asked me to see if I could get Pastor Vern here, Mervyn Small. Okay. He's in Nebraska now, but I had to call him yesterday and said it might have taken me a year and a half from the time that he asked, but he did, he was coming. So Mervyn wasn't going to make it today anyway. But, anyway, so I'd like to welcome Vern and thank you for your family being here. Awesome. And I'll let you go ahead and.
Thank you, Fred. Good morning. Really great to be with you, and hi to Mervyn. Looking at you, Mervyn, right on that camera. Maybe you're joining us. I am telling you this to hold me accountable. My primary form of exercise is riding my bike, and it's winter, so I have it in the basement on a trainer, and I haven't ridden it all winter. And I'm going to ride it today or tomorrow. But now that I've said it, I feel like maybe I'm going to actually do it. I ride a bike because running hurts too much, but that's ironic because I often crash my bike. And when I crash my bike, it hurts. And sometimes it's not my fault. So a couple of years ago, I got hit by a mail truck. So let me tell you how this happened. So the bike path has a gap between the main path on Airport Road down by Main Street in the Heights, right? So you got the Tippy Cow Cafe on the corner right there, and then the Boot Hill Inn across the street there. So I'm coming downhill and I'm on the sidewalk, and I'm on the left side of the road because that's how you connect in the bike path. And as I was coming down, there was a mail truck coming out of where that like that fence company is right there. So he had just dropped off mail and he's going to head up Airport Road. Well, I saw him look first to his left because that's where the traffic is going to be coming from. A good decision. Then he looked right, which means he's looking in my direction, and we did not make eye contact. And I knew in that moment that he did not see me, and he didn't. And then he turned and looked left again, and now there's cars coming around Main Street heading up towards the airport. So he punches it, and he comes shooting out of that parking lot right as I'm in front of him. And I knew I had an option maybe to put my brakes on, but I would have slammed into the side of him. So I thought if I just go, you know how you can think really, really fast in moments like these? Like it takes a long time to talk about it, but it was half of a second. I thought, if I get in front of him, maybe he'll see me and put on his brakes. That's my only chance. I was so wrong. He just, I guess, T-boned me, right? Like he hit me right in the front of his truck. And I might have been okay or not as bad, but you know how those U.S. Postal white trucks, have that mirror apparatus that kind of hooks onto the front quarter panel? It's got some pipes that go up and then those globe mirrors, right? So they can see people that he didn't see me. Well, I hit that thing, right? Because I'm going this way. He hits me like this. I get pushed towards the street, but I also hit these pipes like right here. So now I'm flipping in the air and I'm upside down. But moving into traffic, and so I land in the middle of the street on my back, sliding, losing my skin, on the cheese grater. I come to a stop, and the first thing I think of is the reason that guy, I thought help, the reason that guy hit his accelerator so hard is because there was cars coming, and now I'm lying in the road where the cars would be coming. So I rolled over and I crawled over to the curb and sat there. And then it was quite a long process for, he had to call his supervisor who told him to hang up and call HR and call legal. And so it took a long time for people to come in. I mean, it's the United States Postal Service. So it took a while for them to get to me. And then the cops have to come. And while I'm sitting there healing, I'm in a conversation with the guy that ran into me. And I learned that he is a single dad of a 7-year-old son, that he's been in training with the post office for 51 weeks. This was a Monday. On Friday, he would finish his training and go full-time permanent position. But he just hit a cyclist. So he's in trouble. And so I was like, okay. And it took long enough for me to kind of go like, my bleeding's kind of stopping. Like, things are okay. Like, the swelling hasn't increased. I'm going to be fine. And so I have to write up the report, And I wrote it up like, could have happened to anybody. He just didn't see me. No big deal. Because I did not want that guy to lose his job, right? I mean, he's a single dad of a 7-year-old. He's about to go full time. I just couldn't, I could be a wealthy man today because I could have sued the government, Nope. I just wanted to help him. By the way, that guy, I won't tell you his first name, but I'll tell you his last name. His last name is Hit. So I got hit by a guy named Hit, which I think is kind of funny about the whole thing. And he's full-time regular now. One of the reasons that I don't want to try to get something out of them or out of him is because of how many times I've made mistakes in my life. Right? The older you get, you're like, man, I've screwed up a lot of things. And end up with regrets. And you hear people, usually famous people, talk about, I don't have any regrets in life. And I'm like, I don't know anything about that because I got all kinds of regrets. Now, the great thing is that Jesus forgives me for the dumb things that I've done, for the sins that I've committed. But I still feel bad about that and grateful for his forgiveness. And sometimes our screw-ups and our guilt can make us want to just quit, maybe not bounce back. And so we might be willing to just sit in a desert and rot and not be engaged in the things that God is actually inviting us into simply because we look back at our past failures. But man, God isn't done with us yet, right? And so God is God, and what he does is he takes brokenness and he makes beauty out of it because he's just so good and so gracious that he even takes our badness and can turn it to goodness, takes failure and turns it to success, uses our mess ups to cause us to grow up. We've been already talking about that today in our prayer time. And so what God does is he rescues people. And sometimes we feel like we've messed it up so bad and maybe too often that God isn't going to use us. It's just not true. So your setback is really a setup for a comeback. And I was excited when I heard from Fred the way we're using the daily bread to sort of set up the next sermon. And so he told me, the week that I would be preaching, and then I went to the daily bread and started reading, the readings for this week. And I was so excited to see that Exodus chapter 3 was a part of our reading this week. So I'm going to talk to you about Exodus chapter 3. So if you have a Bible, that's where we're going to be, second book in the Bible and the third chapter. And we're going to look a little bit at the life of Moses, because Moses is one of history's greatest comebacks. And I think we can learn from him and be inspired. And Exodus 3 gets a little technical, but I'm going to make it really understandable because it took me a while to figure it out. And I hope it'll be helpful and inspiring for you as well. So you might know the story of Moses, and he's the guy with the famous burning bush. And the bush is burning, and Moses goes over to it and takes off his shoes because it's holy ground. And then God starts to talk with him and lets him know that he's calling Moses to liberate the slaves that are in Egypt. So this was after Joseph. So Joseph now is running the nation of Egypt. And then all the Hebrews basically move there under Joseph, and then they grow and they're prosperous and they're blessed, and they grow to like maybe as many as 3 million people. But then the Pharaoh starts abusing them. He starts oppressing them, and he makes them slaves. And so now there's this slavery of the Hebrew people that's going to last about 400 years. So, as a baby, Moses is under an execution order. So the Pharaoh's like, they're getting too many, let's kill the babies. And so Moses' mom puts him in this tiny little raft and puts him in the Nile River, and he's floating down, and he gets pulled out by the daughter of the king, by the Pharaoh, and he gets educated in the courts as a grandson of the Pharaoh. At age 40, he sees a couple of Egyptian soldiers mistreating his brothers, so a Hebrew, and he reacts to the whole thing violently and kills him. Well, now he's got to flee, because now the Pharaoh's like, well, I'm going to kill you for doing that. And so he leaves, and he flees to a place called Midian, which was a desert type of area. There he gets married. He becomes a shepherd for another 40 years. And so now he's 80. And the Pharaoh dies in Egypt, which means that the execution order again on him is lifted. It's safe for him to return. The death sentence is lifted. And now he's got a new problem, and that is that the Pharaoh is essentially his brother. He grew up with him. This is where Moses then comes to him and says, let my people go, the famous line. Well, then there's the 10 plagues and the Red Sea, and then, the mess up at the border, and then 40 years of wilderness wandering, and then they finally get into the promised land, and Moses dies at 120 years old. Young guy. So 40 years a prince, 40 years a shepherd, 40 years a deliverer, 80 years in the making. Moses is one of the greatest humans in human history. So how did that happen? Like, what's the detail around how that guy could mess up so bad and yet still then be such an important person in history? Well, I'd like us to think about it in terms of how Moses dealt with two questions. One question is, who am I? But the second question is, who are you? And there's a difference here that Moses at 80 years old figured out. That he didn't get an answer to the age-old question, who am I? What he did get an answer to is the question, who are you? And so let me show you how it goes down. In the burning bush conversation, this is verse 7. God says this, and I bring this up because there's these 4 verbs in here that are so powerful. So this is Hebrews 3:7. I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I'm concerned about their suffering, so I've come down to rescue them. So do you see those cool verbs there? That God sees, he hears, he's concerned, and then he comes down. This is not what God used to do. This is what God is still doing. He sees our situation. He hears our prayer. He's actually concerned about us, and he comes to us. So he's going to do that for his people. Verse 9, and now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. And look, he says it again. I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, and this is the biggie, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So this is the big call now on Moses' life. And in an instant, he knows what a challenge this is going to be. And so then he says, verse 11, who am I? There's that question. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? So God is saying to Moses, you go fix this. And Moses responds with, who am I to do this? It's actually a reasonable question. because this guy is an outcast shepherd living in a foreign land, totally cut off from his family and his culture. He's got zero credibility in Egypt. And so God is essentially saying to Moses, just travel the 160 miles over wilderness terrain to the most powerful and advanced civilization on the planet and confront the most powerful person on the planet, Pharaoh, who happens to basically be your brother, but a man that the Egyptians revere as a deity, as a god, and demand that this king slash god release his 3 million slaves that are working every day to build entire cities that will serve as monuments to the king's ego. He's going to release his 3 million slaves when they're building all of this stuff for him. So Moses is going, I don't have what it takes to do that. Who am I? The question implies unworthiness, inability, inferiority, ineptitude, fear. Now, anybody ever felt this way? Like who am I? Maybe some of it is because of your past. Like anybody in here have some regrets? I think it's weird when you hear people, it's usually famous people that say, I don't have any regrets. And I'm like, I don't relate to that. I got all kinds of regrets. So again, grateful for the forgiveness, but sometimes the things that we do, the decisions that we made, that feels like it probably disqualifies us to be used by God. Like murder. That's Moses' situation. Maybe you had an opportunity or a responsibility or even a calling and you didn't go for it because of whatever that is weighing you down. Well, the good news is that there's more invitations by God coming, and might even happen to you today. And I would just encourage you to ask a different question. Instead of who am I to do that, because God didn't answer that question. He could have answered that question to Moses. It would have been reasonable for him to answer that question to Moses. When Moses says, who am I? God could have said, well, you're the king's brother, and you know Egypt really well, and you're a Hebrew, so you've got credibility with those people. You obviously have compassion for them, and compassion moves people to action. You've got a strong sense of justice. We saw that when you screwed up and killed that guy. And you've been tempered and matured and equipped because you've been a shepherd for the last 40 years. You're a leader, Moses. You can do this. Now, I might have tried to give him an inspiring speech like that, but God is not answering the question, who am I? God doesn't say any of that to him. What God does is he answers a different question. So, verse 12. And God said, I will be with you. And then he says, well, let me stop there real quick. So there's the answer to the question. It's not about who you are, it's about who is with you. I will be with you. So Moses is saying, I don't think I can do this. And God's saying, well, you're not going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm just using you to do it. And then God gives him some very, what I think is unhelpful assurance. Because watch how he says this. And this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Now, do you see how that's not very helpful in the moment? Because you won't know that you did the right thing until you're on the back side of it and realize, oh, we did the right thing. But we want to know now if we're making the right decision. So God is saying to him, you're going to bring the people out, and you're going to bring them right back here, and then on that day, you're going to know that I was with you. But Moses has to make a decision now if he's going to go actually over to Egypt. And so this is where faith begins to come in. Again, can't have any belief system without faith. Even a belief system that claims to have no faith is a contradiction, because you're having faith that there is no faith. Life runs on faith. We use faith every day. And so this is good that we got to have faith. It's normal and it's powerful, and God invites us and actually commands us to be people of faith. And especially when you don't know how in the world you're going to pull off the things that God is inviting you into, or what's the next challenge that you're facing in your life. But we want a sign before we get into that. Like, hey, I got this idea. Should I do it? God, give me a sign. And he's like, yeah, when it's all done, you're going to know I was with you. It helps me right now. It doesn't help that much for that next step that we need to take. So give me a sign. Yep, I will. When it's all done, you're going to know how awesome it was that I was with you. So he's saying, put your faith and your belief and trust in God as leader, and he's going to keep his promises. But Moses is still confused about all of that, so he asks a good question, verse 13. Moses says to God, well, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what's his name? Then what should I tell him? So you see the switch that's happening with Moses. He's going from who am I to, wait a minute, who are you? So this is really important. Who are you that's telling me what to do and that you're actually going to be with me? Because if you can't handle what you're telling me to do, that's not that helpful, right? Now, in the Hebrew language and in the Hebrew culture, naming somebody is extremely powerful. People were named intentionally and even got their names changed because of some part of their life, some characteristic. And so they were very intentional in the way they named people. So your name has a meaning, as you know. Does anybody in the room know the meaning of your name? Okay, so my middle name is Gregory, and that means watchman. Oh, yeah, I'm a protector, I'm a watchman. My first name is Vernon. That means leafy bush. And so apparently my parents were like, he's going to be a watchman hiding behind a leafy bush. So in Hebrew, it carries a ton of weight. So they're very intentional about it. And Moses knows that he doesn't have much credibility. He's been gone for 40 years. He's 80. He's grizzled. He's kind of smelly because of the sheep. He's a murderer. So he can't just waltz in and say, God told me, because they're going to look at him and go, oh, he did he? They're going to want to know, who is this God that told him? And more importantly, who is this God that you speak of? Who is this God that wants to rescue us? They're going to want to know. Moses wants to know. It's a huge question. By what authority do you come here? Who do you represent? Now, Moses gets the answer, and it's one of the most important verses actually in the entire Bible, because this is where God is now introducing himself. Be the first time that he's doing this. So the first time is extremely crucial, because this is how we're to know him. So Moses gets the answer from God, where God is basically saying, you get to drop my name because my name has some meaning and there's credibility to it. So verse 14, God said to Moses, he's answering the question, what is his name? I am who I am. This is what you're to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Okay. So Moses says, who are you? And God says, I am who I am. And you can call me I am. To which I think Moses would go, that's actually not very helpful. Now, it was actually very helpful for him, but it's something that we have to kind of figure out, especially because we read our Bibles in English, but it was written in Hebrew. And so it's hard for us to understand this. So the Hebrew word, I am who I am, the Hebrew word is Ehyeh. Would you say that with me? 1, 2, 3. Ehyeh. Okay, you speak Hebrew now. Congratulations. So Ehyeh is, it's translated I am. Now, what it speaks of is God's self-existence. It means that God doesn't need anybody, doesn't need anything, doesn't need anyone. He is self-existent, totally independent from anything, including humans. So he's the self-existent one, needing no one. Okay? So that's verse 14. I am who I am, tell him I am. Then God says to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, and then it goes on, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I'm to be remembered from generation to generation. So you can see why we're in this really powerful and important part of the Bible, because God is saying this is the name. Okay, so when you look at the word the Lord, this translation here doesn't have it quite, it's not that helpful for us. Maybe the Bible in your lap for some of you, you can see it. But typically the word Lord in a English translation is capital L and then small cap O-R-D. That's how the English translators of our Bible would designate for us that this is the word Yahweh. Now, Yahweh is a word that we're pretty familiar with as a name for God. Well, it's the name for God. It's the essential name of God. And it translates, He is. So, Ehyeh, I am, Yahweh, He is. So when we're going to talk about God, we're using third person, God is, He is. And so it would be Yahweh. That's why His name is Yahweh, because every time we say it, we're declaring that God is. God's not going to say He is because He's talking about Himself. He would say, I am. Ehyeh, and now what we say is Yahweh. When we're talking about God, He is. Okay, both of those, I am and He is, Ehyeh and Yahweh, enunciate, reiterate, pound into our heads that God is the self-existent one. The self-existent one, capital O. Okay, then you add to that the future tense of Ehyeh, which was back in verse 12 when it says, I will be with you. So this is the answer to the question. Well, now the name is starting to broaden a little bit. He's the self-existent one who wants to be with you, because he says, I will be with you. God doesn't do anything He doesn't want to do. He wants to be with you. Then you add into that the description in verse 15 that He is the God of your fathers. So when you read, especially in Old Testament, and you run into the God of your fathers, or it says the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that was code. It was a reminder to the people that were listening or reading that God keeps His promises. That's the point He's making when He continues with those three names, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. I kept my promises to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and I'm going to keep my promises to you. So it's a signal when you see it. Oh, that's right. He keeps His promises just like He did to our fathers. So then you start to see the name of God even round out some more. Self-existent one who wants to be with you for your good, because that's His promises. It's for our good. Then you see that it's His name forever in verse 15, and now the fullness of His name is really rounding out. That Yahweh is, as He introduces Himself to humanity, the self-existent one who wants to be with you for your good forever. It's His name forever. That's eternity. So when Moses says, who am I? God ignores him and says, let me tell you about me, because Moses says, who should I say? Who are you? And then God walks him into the fullness of His name by using very carefully chosen words that are popping off the page at us. In English, if God was talking to us, and as He would, because, well, for me, I only know one language, it would be English. In Hebrew, it's kind of hidden because we don't speak Hebrew. But what Moses would have heard is God saying, I am the self-existent one who wants to be with you, Moses, for your good, and will do it forever. That's what Moses heard. So that means that for Moses, as he moves forward and becomes one of the greatest people in history, He's not dealing with the question, who am I? Instead, he's saying, I know you, and I can do anything you want me to do. We're going to go free slaves? We'll free slaves. Now, when you get to the New Testament, we're introduced to Jesus. Now, his name Jesus is how we say it in English, but in Hebrew, his name is Yeshua. And it shows us what Jesus' name means. It doesn't just mean God saves, it's Yahweh saves. Every time you say Jesus, every time Jesus is interacting with somebody in what we call New Testament, it's a throwback to Exodus chapter 3. Jesus is the self-existent one who wants to be with you for your good forever. That was his message to us, and then he followed through with his sacrifice for us. That means his rescue is his gift to us that we simply receive. And so as you think about what God has for you, the decisions that you need to make for the rest of your life, it's not about finding out who you are. It's not about finding yourself. It's about who God is and then aligning yourself with him and his character. Oh, he's the self-existent one, means he doesn't need me, but wants to be with me for my good, and he'll do it forever? Let's do that. And that's why Moses, who was a screw-up, became one of the greatest people in human history. How did he do that? Not by asking the question, who am I? But who are you, God? And God answered him, I'm the self-existent one who wants to be with you for your good forever. And that's still who God is. And so what Moses says is, okay, I'm going with him. And we should say the same thing. Okay, I'm going with him wherever he wants to go. I will follow him. And I hope you will. Could I pray, please? Heavenly Father, we thank you for the richness of the scriptures. And there's just so much to learn, so many ways for us to understand who you are, to grow closer to you. It is very worshipful for us, Lord, that you don't need anything and you don't need us, but you chose to come our way and be a part of our lives. That you actually like us. That is so worshipful, and we are so grateful. I pray for every one of us now, Lord, that as we face the next decision, as we wrestle with the calling on our lives from you and the things that you want us to do, the ways in which we can obey you even when it's costly and risky, I pray, Lord, that you would come near to us and that we would understand you as the self-existent one who really likes us and wants to be with us, and you've got our best interest at heart. It's for our good, and it will last forever. We are so thankful. We give you praise. And in Jesus, or Yeshua's name, amen. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you.